situation. He took a pitch in the back. He got beamed for crying out loud.
We used heart attack.
Managers on a Major League Baseball team don't make decisions.
Could have done without that.
Credibility in this situation is worse than losing your job.
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?
The castration of the Major League Baseball managers, we know it.
Ask me about my winner.
I've made it very clear over the years that I enjoy sports. In fact, sports, I think, are one of the greatest gifts that we can be given for those that want to distract from other things that happen in our lives. My identification with sports is it really comes at the expense of any issues one could be going through, any things that are going on in the world, any negativity. Let's say John Q. Public's average job and the monotony of that. I think sports allow us to go into this imaginary world and just envision for a certain time frame, a couple hours, 3 hours, maybe 4 hours tops during a given game, that we're teleported somewhere else, as opposed to, the mundane things that we think about and bring to our attention all the time. And when sports integrate with politics, when sports integrate with world issues, I understand why they do, but I do express my disappointment when sports move into a different territory and start discussing things that I feel, as the sports fan that I am, that I'm getting away from by watching sports. Now, some of these things are very subtle. Some of them aren't as big when it comes to the discussion of race, the discussion of equality, war, as it happens throughout the world. You want to stay away from politics when it comes to the world of sports. You want to focus on the action. But sometimes some of the things that get in our way and intersect with sports are very subtle, and they happen on, a given field or ice or court or arena or stadium or, like I said, field. So when you watch the back and forth that happens between any two teams over the course of a physical series, you're obviously seeing it going on in the NHL right now. Well, when teams, they could get a little physical and, have big time altercations within just one game. When you're stuck facing the same opposition 3, 4, 5 to 7 games, there starts to be some animosity between the two squads. You're seeing it happening in basketball. You got the little rift that's going on between the Golden State Warriors and the Memphis Grizzlies. And a lot of that is, and it could be kind of put aside to, hey, boys being boys, men being men. It's competitors, wanting their team to come out on top. Going to do everything they can to put them in the best position to win a series. Golden State wants to win the series. Memphis wants to win the series. And during physical action that's happening on the court, they're going to do everything they possibly can to put themselves in the best position to win. I just hate wanting. I really do. I just hate how it's become so prolific in our sports. And when you look at a sport like basketball, which I grew up on, I grew up in the 1980s. I grew up during a time where basketball, you can make a case, was as physical as football and hockey. And you think of it now, you say, wow, basketball was as physical as basketball and hockey? Yes. Every game was a fight. The playoffs that I grew up watching in the late 80s and the early part of the 90s were something that couldn't be any more different than what you see right now in the NBA. There was people that literally were out there trying to hurt each other. Now understand, listen, Dylan Brooks, a hard foul on Gary Payton, and he's injured. He probably won't be able to play the rest of the postseason. Maybe if the Warriors make it to the NBA Finals, he'll be back, and hopefully he heals up as quickly as possible. But there's a lot of, oh man, it must have been on purpose. Dylan Brooks must have been out there trying to hurt him. And the NBA kind of felt that way because they suspended him. They suspended him for a game. Now, there's basketball plays, and there's intent to injure. We've seen it. And growing up in the 80s, watching the physicality and Guys that didn't like what they saw would literally punch the other dude in the face. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who I still think to this point is the most underrated NBA player to ever play in a sports history. You watch him just knock a guy out by punching him in the face. That's what happened in the 80s and probably earlier in the 70s. I can't remember watching basketball then, but we understood that this was such a physical game. But you've watched the way it's changed. The JoJo English, Derek Harper fight kind of led to something changing. Alonzo Mourning and Larry Johnson and Jeff Van Gundy, hugging Mourning's leg. That led to some change in the way that basketball is going to be perceived. Now, there's fouls for coming off the bench. You come off the bench, you're automatically suspended. If you're not on the court and you join in an altercation, then you're not going to play the next game. It's that simple. It's like, being caught carrying a gun in New York City. If it's an unregistered gun, you're going to serve time in jail. Ask Plaxico Burress. But what frustrates me is that there is that extra drama for a game that really has taken an awful lot of physicality out of it. And one of the things that is frustrating is the thinking man's basketball game now, because in your mind you're trying to outsmart whatever perception of the rules you see. How could you draw more fouls? James Harden literally puts the ball in both of his arms and just bull rushes to a point where he's hoping to get a foul. And then the guy on the other end is trying to get himself in the right position to not move, to initiate the contact, to where the ref is going to call the offensive foul. That's what the game has turned into. That's the most physical part of basketball right now. But once again, you think in the world of, not even just basketball, but other sports, you have an injury to somebody that's on your team, and you're going to automatically think that the other team did it on purpose. And if the other team commits a foul, which somebody ends up getting hurt, John Morant gets hurt in the next game, all of a sudden it's like Jordan Poole did that on purpose. And you know what? The only people that believe that are the Golden State Warriors. And the only people that believe that Dylan Brooks intentionally tried to hurt Gary Payton are the Memphis Grizzlies. And this goes back to what I was saying about, the Mets and the Cardinals. The Mets are tired of getting hit. They think everybody's throwing at them. And, God forbid they throw a pitch that goes inside to their opposition. Automatically, they're trying to retaliate. And every time that they get hit, that pitcher is absolutely 100% unequivocally throwing the ball at them, trying to hurt them. Not just trying to hit them, but trying to hurt them. And this is like just the silly antics that you see in the world of sports. And you know what? I've said before, I'm out to watch the game. But I understand that there's a game within the game. And I get the physicality, especially when we're talking playoffs. Football playoffs are different because these games are set up to be just one and done. You move on, you face, if you face a division rival in a postseason game, that's the third time you've played them all year. You got 6 and 7 game series against the same team. In most cases, you're thinking basketball, hockey, baseball, conference rivals, sometimes division rivals that we've seen multiple times already. You get how players can get underneath each other's skin. That's just natural. But to me, I think that I don't want to call it full of shit, but it kind of is. It kind of is if you think about, the only people that are going to say that player X was trying to hurt player Y were player X's teammates. And player Y's teammates are going to say, well, we weren't trying to hurt him. And it is the stupid game that goes back and forth. And, to think about the change in the NBA over the course of the last 35, 40 years, you've seen a big change. And the physicality within the sport is not what it used to be. But yet we try to make it out to be a lot more than it is because we watch television. Everybody's watching their favorite podcast. You got whatever channel it is of sports that's going to continuously have this group of people and the next group of people all talking about the same thing. And it gets really blown out to a lot more than it is. You know what? Another big difference in 35, 40 years ago, There wasn't any 24-hour sports networks. In fact, 24-hour on the radio sports networks were just starting to become a thing in the late 80s. So, this need for fill, which I think it's what it is. It's a need to fill, topics, fill time slots, give people different reasons to talk about it and think about it. I mean, you got people that are not even experts in any given field, just throwing their own opinion. And that's all it is. I go out there and I give an opinion that you don't want to hear. Well, you know what? You got the right to say whatever it is that you want to me. You want to put me down, you want to insult me, I'm okay with that. And I bring that when it comes to the thought of players speaking, which is a topic I've brought up on this show before, because there's that narrative that says, hey, stick to sports, which I couldn't disagree with anymore. Now, if somebody wants to go out there and say some outlandish thing, you want to say, make a comparison, Kyrie Irving, hey, the world is flat. Whatever. Now, you could say that. I got the right to criticize that if I think it's an outlandish statement. I got the right to, see him going out there to talk and hit the mute button, or not watch him if he's out there and speaking. But he should have the right to feel however he wants to. In fact, the stick to sports narrative is something that the more you think about, the more you realize is really set to put other people down. And I'm not saying there's a racial motivation behind it, but it gets brought up mostly when it comes to basketball players speaking, mostly when it comes up to football players speaking. And these are people that predominantly in the sport are black. So there is this narrative to try to shut people down. And a different way to do it is say, well, if you play sports, you shouldn't talk about anything that isn't related to sports. Well, if we apply that to everyday life, there's a lot of people that wouldn't have an opinion on a lot of given topics. How many people talk about politics but are not politicians? How many people give advice when it comes to the treatment of a cold or an injury or something but do not have a medical license? How many people as parents give simple help to their children when it comes to homework and they don't have a teaching degree? In fact, some of the greatest information that I've ever learned has come from people that didn't have degrees and were not professionals in the fields that they told me about. I learned a lot about sports and sports history from people that didn't have a doctorate or weren't professionals. I've learned a lot about life from people that were not considered sociologists or philosophers. You have the right as the person that's viewing or listening to interpret the information however you want. If you don't trust the validity of the person that's providing the information, then by all means, don't listen to it. By all means, you don't have to take any advice that's being thrown out there by a professional athlete that's not talking about sports to heart or react to it. You got the right to not listen. You got the right to respond. If you think somebody, like I said, Kyrie Irving, the world is flat. If you think that's such an unbelievably wrong statement, then you got the right to say, listen, you sound like a fool. You're embarrassing yourself. What are you going out there saying that for? But it doesn't take away the ability for one to say what it is that they're saying. So just thinking about baseball as we're squaring ourselves away into the start of the season, some of my frustrations, and I bring up pace of play, not in a way to say, hey, this has got to be an important topic, this has got to be brought up and discussed in Major League Baseball, but the games are running, and it's not about the time, I don't think. I think we've disguised our frustration when it comes to baseball based off of how long a game goes. If there's a game and there's action from start to finish, you're engaged to a point where you don't want that game to end, right? If you're watching a classic basketball game or a classic football playoff game or a classic World Series game. And there's so much back and forth action. You're glued to the television, or you're in the arena or the stadium or the field, and you're there cheering your ass off. And you can't wait to see, hey, is your team going to win? Is your team not going to win? Or if you're neutral and you don't care which team wins, you just want the game to end so you can embrace where you were in this classic moment. When that happens, the length of the game isn't a big deal. And I think we've made the mistakes when it comes to discussing issues with baseball. And we say it's pace of play. We say it's the batter stepping out of the batter's box. It's the pitcher stepping off the rubber. Some other people say, well, it's not that. It's the length of commercial breaks. Listen, baseball is always going to be a game within the game. But the thing that should change, hopefully will, over the course of time, because we feel like all the wrongs have been righted throughout the history of not only baseball, but football, basketball, hockey. That's why we're gravitated towards these sports. That's why we use sports as the hiding away from the everything else that we think about in the world. You don't like your job, you embrace yourself in sports. You don't like what's going on with the potential of a world war. You watch sports. You hate politics. You go to sports. You don't like the weather forecast. You turn on a game. And what you're able to do is you're able to, for that moment, just hide and be in this different world, in this different element where nothing else really matters other than just the action that you're looking on the field. But if the game itself is not that enjoyable, if the game is dragging on, not so much in time, like I said, you give me 4.5, 5 hours of a baseball game that's action back and forth. You're wondering who's going to win. You're wondering who's going to one-up the other team. There's runs being scored. There's guys on the bases. There's strikeouts in big spots. You're seeing the dominance of the athletes that are on the field, great defensive plays, trying to take the extra base in certain spots, long home runs, players scaling a wall to make a catch, players being thrown out, trying to get to the extra base. Stuff like this is all firing you up. I can watch that for 5 hours, and I know a lot of other sports fans can do that. So once again, it's not about the time. It's about the fact that there is limited to no action on the baseball field. And this thought that the game is being controlled by the liveliness of the baseball. But most importantly, it is controlled by the minds. I learned as a young kid that baseball was a thinking man's sport. You're out on the field playing whatever position in Little League, and coach tells you, hey, what would you do if the ball was hit to you? Because you want to be ready. Hey, run around base, you're going to put the ball here. No runners on base, you're going to do this. Are you thinking about if there's a pop-up at second base and a couple runners on? Do you want to let the ball drop? Are they going to call an infield fly? All these different things are coming out there. The battle between the hitter and the pitcher. The pitcher, dominates with pitch A, but the batter knows it. The batter's going to be ready for pitch A. So does the pitcher have something else to deceive them and make them think something else is coming and then throw pitch A right back at them? Yes, we understand that baseball forever has been a thinking man's game. And we've used the technology and everything that we can to our own advantages for the team's sake to try to win, right? I feel, in spite of the issues that I've had with baseball, whether it's owners that really shouldn't be in position to own a professional sports team, their lack of interest in paying players to try to win a championship, winning not being the goal of a handful of owners out there in baseball disgusts me. It bothers me. But then I go back and I think of, hey, how should it be played? Well, you want to do what you can, use the resources you can to give yourself an advantage and the best chance to go out there and win a particular game. Now, just winning the game puts you in a better position for what is the major goal of winning the championship. And you've heard me talk about Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in 1947 and the relationship between him and Branch Rickey, and the understanding that it wasn't all about Branch Rickey wanting the black player to play with the white players. It was his thought of giving the Dodgers the best advantage to win, because that was the goal. The goal was to win. The goal wasn't to be the nicest guys. The goal wasn't to turn a profit, like owners have miscalculated so badly in the world of sports today. His goal was to win a championship, win a National League pennant, win a World Series. And if he could bring a black player into Major League Baseball for the first time in over 60 years, he would have that advantage for the other black players to say, hey, the Dodgers were the ones that broke the color barrier. I want to play with Jackie Robinson, number one. Number two, I want to go to the team that we could see is embracing the dark-skinned athlete. So there was an ulterior motive to Branch Rickey, wanting to bring Jackie Robinson and a colored player into the game of baseball. Analytics are being used for that same reason, to try to give one team, if you belong to one team, you want to use the numbers to give yourself the best advantage possible, but it's coming at the expense of the sport. Now, you're trying to use different numbers, whether it's, StatCast, and StatCast does a good job. You see how hard a ball is hit, the launch angle, players that are going to try to make a play, their probability of making a play. All these different things are kind of, I think, masking how statistics and analytics have taken a lot of action away from baseball. Now, we want to divert the fan who is wondering why there's nothing happening on the field and have them pull out their little app what are seeing, hey, how hard was that ball hit? How fast did that guy run? And while those things have value, it's taken away the basics of baseball and a reason that we watch it. I watch baseball because, listen, I'm trying to entertain myself by watching a game. Now, you're looking at a pitcher pitching 2 innings, throwing very hard, and he's out of the game already. He got his 4 strikeouts. He gave up a hit or 2. Next guy, throwing gas, goes 2 innings, doesn't give up a hit, but walks 2 guys. The other side, the game's going the same way, and you're just watching players come up and sit down. Very few players on the bases, very little action going on in the games. Now, listen, I don't know if baseball was feeling this in the year of the pitcher in 1968, but I would guess, you're looking at a lot of 1-0 games, a lot of games that were not being very high scoring. In a lot of cases, there weren't a whole lot of players or base runners on the field. And baseball did what they could to change the narrative, make more action, involve more action in the game. They started with expansion. They raised the mound. They lowered the mound. And then they put in these things that were supposed to generate more offense. I don't know if offense is what baseball really needs. Now, do you think the shift is something that can be changed over time? Listen, there's a lot of people that feel like the shift should change. Now, I, for one, have subscribed to, why don't you hit against the shift? Baseball players will sit there and all day tell me that they're trying, but it's not that easy. And listen, the pitching is as good as it's ever been. You can't, the pitchers, their ability to throw as hard as they do, but most importantly, their ability to track what they're doing with their pitches. Tracking, the revolutions on their pitches and using all the statistical data to make them better pitchers. That's an advantage that the pitchers have never had before. Is the shifts really changing that? Well, you got a guy in the place where the odds are that the player that's up is going to hit the ball, and he hits the ball there. Well, you say that guy was positioned perfectly. Now, do you change the shift? Do I say ban the shift? No, I don't know. I think that's a little bit too far. You want to leave infielders on the infield? You tell me you can't have 4 outfielders? You tell me you can't have a second baseman out in right field? You need to have 2 infielders on each side of the diamond? A lot of people don't even know that the shortstop, the original position of shortstop, was centered to be in short center field. There was a first baseman that played off of first. There was a second baseman that played to either side of second base. Third baseman played off of third base, kind of where they do now. And the shortstop would play in short center field. That's going back 19th century, 1861, 1870-ish, for those that are trying to figure out, hey, how long ago was this? But there's not a definition of where the shortstop should have to play. So if you're going to move players to different parts of the field, I mean, I just look at some things that baffle me. I did it, and I'm not the biggest advocate for small ball, but what small ball does is it brings more action to the game of baseball. There's more action in small ball. You're watching it as you see it right before your eyes. There's things happening within the game. Hey, if the whole left side of the infield is open and there's a runner on third, I'm going to make sure that runner scores. If the infielder that's playing third base or shortstop is refusing to get close enough to that runner that's on third base, then that's malpractice if that runner doesn't try to score. If that runner doesn't keep trying to get off base as far as they possibly can till you get to a point where you say, well, you know what, if you make any move, I'm just going to go home. There should be more runs scored that way. There should be more teams saying, hey, I'll take a run if the opposition is going to give it to me. Now, how far do you go with it? You say players are going to compromise their statistics or the things that they're getting compensated for more base hits. That player that's out there trying to hit 40, 50 home runs, trying to draw their 100 or so walks, and just trying to put up those stats so they can get their next big contract. How much are they going to compromise that for little slap singles against the shift? More singles equal less home runs, and it probably drives down the average salary of that player. So I see it up to a certain point, and I understand what it is that bothers athletes. You're out there, you're getting compensated based off of how many dingers you hit. It's not how many singles. The Pete Roses of today would have a hard time being amongst the top paid players in all of Major League Baseball. Now, listen, some players do it. I've seen enough games this year to see that there's players that the whole defensive alignment is changed from what it was from the beginning of the year because of their approach. Hey, if you're going to give me a single, I'm going to take the single. And, the lineups have changed a little bit. There's more emphasis on power at the top of the order. The leadoff batter isn't that guy that runs, as fast as anybody. There's not the number 2 hitter that's looking to bunt him over to second. The third and the fourth hitters aren't necessarily the best players, the best offensive position players on a team anymore. I understand that all of that has changed. But if somebody's going to give you a hit, why don't you take the hit? And the momentum, I think there is momentum that exists in baseball. You get a couple runs early that maybe you wouldn't have scored. Maybe that changes the game. Maybe you win a couple more games. I don't know. But I think there's a lot that has been centered around everybody needing to have the data. Everybody needing to do what the information says and maybe not acting as much in game. How do managers in baseball impact that? My stance on managers. I think there's some managers that have tried to buck the trend a little bit. I think there's managers that try to make different decisions in regards to what's going on in the game and use 100% of the data that's given to them. But there's nobody that's gone against the defensive alignments. What the shift said, they're printed on cards. The fielder knows that. The manager goes out to the center fielder and says, take a couple steps over. He's going to stick up his middle finger and say, the card says I'm playing here. Screw you. Leave me alone. That's what baseball is being run off of. So if you're telling me that I think the manager can make the impact over a team winning and a team losing, I only believe it up to a point. I believe that the manager has the locker room. And your players are either playing hard for you or they're not. You get a sense of where your team's at. They know they can count on you. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they're quiet. Maybe they say, you know what, I don't know if this guy really has our backs or our best interest. How does a manager react when there's issues amongst young players? Because think about it, even the oldest players in baseball are young when it comes to the grand scheme of things. Nobody's really over 40 playing anymore outside of Albert Pujols, right? So, older players in baseball are still relatively young. How does a manager handle that type of adversity? I think that's a lot more important than going out there and just writing a lineup now. Now, do managers write their lineups? They don't. Managers have an idea going into the game of who's going to pitch. Not just the starter, but hey, what pitchers are available, what pitchers need rest, what certain sequence are you looking for. Hey, you're going to face the order twice, and then I want to go to this guy because there's going to be a lefty and two lefties and a righty here. It's all set up by the data and analytics staff. All this information is taken and processed, put into report form, and it's understood by the manager. Basically gives a game plan or a template of how they're going to operate the game. Now, like I said, you could hear, if you want to ask somebody a question, hey, do you use data? Do you not use data? How much do you use it? I think this is a bunch of bullshit. I really do. I don't believe in it. I don't believe anything that comes out of a manager's mouth. I think we live in another thing that's changed is the day and age that we live in with the differences in the media coverage. You know, your manager in baseball, every game, every loss, every win has to go out there and answer the same bunch of questions by a bunch of deranged reporters that are trying to make a name for themselves too. And I don't like that. I don't think it is fair to the manager to have to ask all these questions. And you know what? Any manager that, you know, has a half decent brain is gonna make that, I don't know, come up with an answer to that question. Hey, how much are you using? Well, it's almost a standard answer. It's one that almost can't be trusted. I do want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, by St. Aloysius Church in Jackson, New Jersey, by Two Ways, One Passion Food Truck located in Scranton, Pennsylvania. We'll be back with you Wednesday. I'm going to do a show early Wednesday. Who knows what I'm going to talk about? I don't even remember what the hell I talked about now. But if you're interested, you can check out my podcast available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, videos on YouTube. You can also find me on SoundCloud. Follow me on Twitter at John_Pielli. Even want to text me, 732-513-5927. Let me know anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball and sports. We'll be back with you Wednesday. God bless you. And as always, I'll see you on the other side.
Chris Bryant was on the Chicago Cubs roster opening day.
I have many leather-bound books. My apartment smells of rich mahogany.
Why don't you give it all or a majority of it to the team that wins the freaking World Series?
I was going to listen to that, but then I just carried on living my life.
Now they've come out as the biggest Major League Baseball manager apologist.
That'll only make someone work just hard enough not to get fired.
Because hitters are going out there saying, I'm either going to hit a home run or I'm going to strike out. And if I don't get a pitch that I feel like I could drive out of the park,
I'm not even supposed to be here today.
especially prospect whores and hoarders, are going to be a little pissed off at me when I say this.
I'm a dude. The dude disguises another dude.
There are only two managers in baseball's Hall of Fame who have losing records. One of them is the iconic Tommy Mack, who you could say, in spite of winning 5 World Series championships as a manager, could be in as much as a pioneer. And what side of the spectrum they're on? Were they pitching? Were they batting? If your favorite team was pitching and a ball got inside to hit a batter, there's no way that could have been on purpose. But if you were a fan of the team that was batting and a ball got inside and hit somebody or went behind somebody's head, absolutely 100% unequivocally, that pitcher was throwing at him. They put their tail between their legs and decided they're going to do exactly what they're told. You damn well right better give him a contract extension. You damn well right better make him the manager over the next series of years.
35 years ago, I could have loaned your parents the money for an abortion.